Before we get started, a brief reminder that any and all opinions and views shared by hosts and guests on this podcast are the speaker's own and do not represent the views of Primal Kitchen or its affiliates or parent company.
Your brain perceives anything new as a threat. So if you visualize something, whether it's a sporting event or, having to stand up and give a speech at a large conference or something, then when you actually experience it for the first time, it's not as new as if you'd never even thought about it before. So it reduces that perception of threat in your brain. So we know that there's a benefit in the brain of visualizing a certain activity, that it correlates with doing that activity. And then if we think about the impact of mind over matter, which is everything from if you say, that's never going to work out for me, it's going to make you more in the stress state than in the kind of trust state, that it has an impact on your body.
So how did you get into this just whole ancient wisdom and what brought you on this path to what you know about the brain?
Wow, so that goes way back in that I was brought up in London by parents who had just emigrated from India. So I kind of grew up with a mixture of this ancient wisdom. I would come home, my mother would be in a headstand and we would have incense and meditation and
I love it.
Gratitude before eating. We kind of ate Ayurvedic food. But then, I went to school, all my friends were English, and I kind of, wanted to fit in and lead that life too. So I've always kind of had the Western and the Eastern in my life. Then I was, let's put it this way, very much encouraged by my parents to become a medical doctor in the Western tradition. Although they continued to practice, what we'd call alternative therapies in the home. And then, I was in education for 9 years.
Yeah.
So I got to explore different areas of interest, and neuroscience and psychology were definitely the things that I was just attracted to out of pure curiosity. I thought I was going to become a neurologist, but then I became a psychiatrist, which I did for 7 years. Really fascinated by how people think, how, that can change your mood, things that you hear. And I guess one of the issues that I had with it, and the reason I eventually moved on, is that it wasn't very holistic. So things like diet and exercise and art and mindfulness weren't as much part of it as I would have liked to see. So I moved more into the well-being space through business coaching, and then really got to bring the neuroscience into everything and think about brain health and brain-body connection and gut-brain axis. And, that's really what I've kind of become. That's flourished in my personal and professional life.
Okay, so since I work for a food company, right, I'm so curious. Tell me about gut-brain axis. What do people need to know? What are the top 3 things we should be doing?
Okay, so I think let's start with what you need to know. Mm-hmm. So the gut and brain are absolutely intimately connected, and it's a two-way thing. So they're connected through nerves, the vagus nerve most famously, but also other nerves. They're connected through hormones and other chemical messages that pass through the blood. And these go both ways. So if you're stressed, you can see leaky gut, bloating, indigestion, change in your bowel habits. And equally, if your gut microbiome, which are all the good bacteria in your gut, are out of, the ideal state, whether that's because of antibiotics, alcohol, processed food, jet lag, then there will be a knock-on effect on your mood and your brain function and your memory and things like that. So because the brain, we can't see it, and we aren't always really aware of what we're putting in that's affecting how it functions, it's just easier to focus on your gut health. So, okay, you want my top 3 things of what I do for my gut health. So I eat 30 different plant products a week. And that's not just fruits and vegetables, it's anything that came from a plant. So, includes grains and
nuts,
seeds, nuts, coffee, dark chocolate, beans, all of that good stuff. Yeah.
I like that. I like that dark chocolate is in here. Matcha, I'm a matcha drinker.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay, great.
And then varying the color of the vegetable or the foods that you eat. Varying the color, but also focusing on dark-skinned foods. So dark-skinned foods contain more antioxidants called anthocyanins, which promote growth and connection of nerve cells in your brain.
Interesting.
Yeah. Aerobic exercise does that too, and it's also good for your gut. So, I'm going to throw that one in there as a side.
Yeah, okay.
And then the third thing I would say I'm going to keep going with food because it's you. So
Yeah.
eating fermented foods.
Yeah.
So I try to eat sauerkraut or kimchi or kefir or kombucha every day. One of those every day.
I love it. Yogurt?
I try not to have too much dairy, so I stick with kefir. But yeah, you could have live yogurt. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you like avoiding any other things besides dairy? Is there anything we shouldn't be doing? Besides the obvious, right?
Yeah, besides the obvious. I just minimize gluten and dairy because I have just listened to my body and found that that's working for me better now. But I don't avoid them. The major change I made around the age of 30 when I started my reverse aging diet was to completely cut out smoked food.
Interesting. I'm a migraine sufferer, and smoked food is like a trigger, right? Yeah.
And do you supplement with magnesium?
I do. Yeah.
Because that's been shown to be really helpful.
I know. Yeah. Magnesium CoQ10, and they say like riboflavin, whatever B vitamin that is. I can't remember, B12 or something like that. But yeah, I do. Magnesium's like does everything.
Everything, yeah.
I feel like everyone, I mean, I've always been a magnesium person. Magnesium citrate, if you have constipation issues, like that is like the end all cure all. But if you don't, be careful if you end up on the magnesium citrate. But yeah, it is magnesium is a big thing. Okay. All right. I like it. Anything else we need to be doing for the gut-brain connection?
Well, seeing as we've mentioned magnesium, which underlies so many different things in the body, neuromuscular junctions, memory, mood, sleep, it's actually best taken through your skin rather than through your gut. So I bathe in magnesium flakes 3 to 5 times a week.
I love it. I put some of that in my kids' bath.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just like they put in like handfuls. I don't know if I'm putting in enough for what I'm doing, but I do. I'm a fan.
Yeah.
But bathing, I mean,
it's much more of a British thing than
it's just like, I'm just thinking, the time, I mean, this is so American. Oh, foot bath.
You could do a foot bath.
I could do a foot bath.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. All right, speaking of that, since I'm like getting all corporate on you, not really corporate, but just like mom, 3 kids under the age of 5, running a company, like probably would have been a great candidate. Are you still doing executive coaching? I would be a great candidate for your executive coaching program on just like help me here with my migraines and all these things. What do I need to know about stress?
Yeah, you need to know about it. I mean, I always say knowledge is power. So the more you know, the more you can understand what's going on, and then the more you can do about it. So basically, depending on your age and your gender, there's a normal range for the stress hormone cortisol.
Yeah.
And it's part of our 24-hour body clock. So just like melatonin helps us fall asleep, cortisol helps us wake up. I'm sure 3 little kids under the age of 5 also help you to wake up quite frequently.
Every day.
Yeah. So, and it's absolutely normal for cortisol to, go up and down between that range. And we have an amazing adaptive stress response, which is that, if there's a deadline, if there's a really important interview, then your body releases some cortisol and adrenaline to help you to meet that challenge. But if you're chronically stressed, then the levels of cortisol are high, towards the top of that range or even higher more of the time. And your brain does not like this. It has receptors that are constantly searching out for threat. And a way that your brain knows that you're under threat is if your cortisol levels are high all the time. And it's sensing that in the receptors that check the levels of everything in the blood that goes around your brain. So again, kind of keeping to the food theme, one of the top perceived threats to your survival is starvation. So to help you to get through whatever time you may be low on supplies, cortisol actually helps you to store more fat in your abdominal cells so that you can use that to survive until you find a food source. So like when you're
stressed, your cortisol goes up, your body's like, hang on to it. We're in a stressful environment.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
And so it's not just normal weight gain all over your body. It's particularly around your belly, and it's really hard to shift. So you may notice it and then say, okay, I'll move around a bit more. I'll eat a bit less, or I'll eat a bit differently, but you still can't shift that weight. That's when you know it's cortisol.
Interesting. So what do you do?
So check out for some other potential signs. Because cortisol is part of the 24-hour body clock, sleep disturbance is another sign. Because of the gut-brain axis, any indigestion symptoms are another sign. And obviously there are mood signs like irritability. So what I kind of tend to hear people like you say is that I can just about keep it together at work, but when I get home, if my kids are too demanding, if my spouse isn't understanding, I could just snap. And when you feel like that, it's only a matter of time till you could actually snap at work, and that's obviously not acceptable.
Yeah.
So check off all of those, do journaling, write it down, see what your patterns are. And then there's two main therapeutic ways to deal with that. One is aerobic exercise that helps you to sweat cortisol out of your body. And the other one is, whether it's through journaling, speaking to a friend or a therapist, is actually speaking out loud the stresses that you're aware of, the negative emotions on your mind, and just getting that out of your brain body system. And then magnesium, because when we're stressed, the body leaches us of magnesium, and you can't eat enough nuts, seeds, leafy greens to replenish it. You have to supplement.
Interesting. What is this sweating cortisol? Like, that's a thing? Like, you can actually sweat the cortisol out of your body?
Yeah, so it's the same mechanism for how women who live together or work closely together synchronize their periods.
Yeah. Okay.
So they're steroid hormones, estrogen, progesterone, cortisol. So they come out of our sweat. And cortisol, doesn't matter if you're male or female, but if, let's say you and I sat together at a desk this closely every day, if you are super stressed by your little, kids and your big job, then your cortisol particles that you're exuding into the air around me would go in through my skin and artificially raise my cortisol levels. So I would feel stressed from being around you, even if I'm not actually stressed in my own life.
That's crazy. One of my favorite things is like the sign over the door that says, "Please take responsibility for the energy you bring into this room."
Yeah.
Like, this is that on cortisol.
Literally steroids. No pun intended. Yeah.
Crazy. So we're really picking up everybody else's like energy field in a very proven way.
Yeah, we're picking up the words that they say. We're picking up the body language and the, micro muscular changes in the facial expressions. And we're picking up the hormone levels, particularly if they're suppressed. So, as a leader of a business, there are times where you have to put on a brave face.
Yeah.
And tell everybody that everything's going fine, it's going to be okay. But if you know in your gut that that's not necessarily true, people can pick up on that.
Interesting. So you mentioned like talking things out with friends and stuff. Like, what's the science behind that? Like, like verbally releasing the emotion, I guess. I'm curious. So, like, is there science behind it?
Yeah. So it's almost like the mental, emotional version of sweating the stress hormone out physically. So it's, how they say name your emotion, so you know what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
It's taking it one step further and actually saying, Morgan, I'm feeling really stressed. And the reason is because you keep giving me these deadlines that I can't possibly keep up with. And I feel like I'm letting you down all the time, and that, you're going to fire me.
Yeah.
But so once I've said that, I actually just feel better because I've said what I'm thinking deep down. And then if you say, I didn't realize I was making you feel like that, you push back to me when I give you a deadline, and, I'm absolutely not thinking of firing you. I value you. Of course, that's going to make me feel better.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would never happen because I never fire anyone. And all my friends work for us at Primal Kitchen, and they have for like 9 years. But anyway, I think I'm like they're probably like, "Morgan, you've given us no feedback. Like, are we doing a good job or not?" And I'm just like, "You got it. You're good." I'm like the anti-micromanager. But okay. Science, there was like an interesting quote I saw from you, or not a quote, but I guess like a little tidbit of information about weightlifting and the study about, I guess, would it be, I don't know if it's visualization or manifestation, but talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would call it visualization, because in sports psychology, visualization has been a thing for a long time. And so that's for a few reasons. One is that your brain perceives anything new as a threat. So if you visualize something, whether it's a sporting event or, having to stand up and give a speech at a large conference or something, then when you actually experience it for the first time, it's not as new as if you'd never even thought about it before. So it reduces that perception of threat in your brain.
Interesting.
And also we know from things like, if people are in a coma, that if you say to them, imagine carrying out a certain task, like imagine playing tennis, that similar parts of the brain light up as when we actually play tennis.
Okay.
So we know that there's a benefit in the brain of visualizing a certain activity, that it correlates with doing that activity. And then if we think about the impact of mind over matter, which is everything from, if you say, that's never going to work out for me, That's, it's going to change your posture. It's going to make you more in the stress state than in the kind of trust state, that it has an impact on your body. And a couple of other studies that I'll just mention to lead up to the weight training one. One was actually done in Florida. We have someone from Florida in the room. And there was a group of medical students, so young, healthy volunteers, who were asked to walk between 5 rooms. And there was a table in each room with pieces of paper on it that had a word on each piece of paper. And they had to string a sentence out of those words.
Okay.
Now, they thought that was the whole experiment, but there was a sort of a trick behind the experiment that they knew about, which was that one of the tables had the words beach, bungalow, walk, Florida, sunshine. And for a lot of people in America, those words will make you think of retirement. And they showed that people walked more slowly out of that room, even though the groups of people entered the rooms in different orders, because just thinking about retirement slows down. Yeah.
Stop it. That's crazy.
I know. So, and then on the other hand, there was my favorite experiment. 3 groups of people in their 80s. One group, the control group, just lived like normal for a week. One group had to reminisce about being in their 60s for a week. So, that week you just thought about, every time you came across a photo or a person, you kind of recalled what it was like 20 years ago. And the third group, they were taken to homes that were retrofitted to look like their homes did 20 years ago. If they didn't have the same walking aid or hearing aid or visual aid 20 years ago, that was changed to match what they had 20 years ago. They had a photo of themselves in the house that was of themselves in their 60s, and they were given newspapers from 20 years ago and asked to live in that scenario for a week. After just 1 week, the people who lived in the retrofitted homes were taller, stronger, had better musculoskeletal coordination and vision, and in before and after photos of themselves before they entered that house and 1 week later, people who didn't know them rated them all as younger in the after photo.
Wait, what do you mean retrofitted homes?
For homes that were made to look like they were 20 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So like they're envisioning themselves like as if they were younger when they were in the homes.
They're not envisioning.
They're just in the environment.
They are living like that. The second group were remembering being like 20 years ago, and the first group didn't change. So the second group also had some improvements, but not as much as the third group. And when I say they were taller, it's because their posture improved. And when I say they were stronger, it's because they did things that they wouldn't do, because they would, for example, when they arrived with their suitcase for a week, they expected the crew to take their suitcase to their room. But the crew said, well, no, you're 60 now, so you can carry your own suitcase. So straight from the start, they had to carry a suitcase that normally they'd say, oh, well, I'm an 80-year-old lady. Who's going to carry my suitcase for me? And they were just told no, so they had to do it. And the musculoskeletal coordination is that, their balance improved because they just, they did things they didn't used to, and they just like grew their confidence. And they literally looked younger after a week because
it's crazy.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack in this, just about like retirement. My dad always says he like doesn't want to retire in Florida. Sorry, another Florida shout out. But he's like, I want to retire in like a college town. Yeah. Like, so do you think there's something to like, there's a lot to the environment is what I'm picking up on, perhaps.
Yeah. There's a lot to the environment. But I'd also say there's something to be said for spending time with people who are 20 years older because of their wisdom.
Totally.
And also with people who are 20 years younger, because that keeps you young. It keeps you up to date with technology and popular culture. Yeah.
So interesting. Okay, now the weightlifting study, the other one about like the muscle growth.
Yeah. So this one was...
Listen to me. I'm like, all right, on to the next one. I got to know the next study that everyone needs to hear about because this is crazy.
So there's always a control group that just don't change what they do. Right. So they carried on lifting weights. And then there was a group that for a period of time didn't actually lift weights, but visualized themselves lifting weights. And these were finger weights and elbow weights.
What does that mean, finger weights and elbow weights?
So literally like lifting something like this or doing this kind of exercise. So they
literally lifting something with a finger. Yeah. They were visualizing that.
They were either, one group was doing it and one group was visualizing it. Yeah. So basically what came out of that was that the group who only visualized doing it and didn't lift weights for that period of time still actually showed an increase in muscle mass. It was about half as much as the people who were actively lifting weights. Now, partly that's explained by the fact that when you rest, your muscles actually do grow, and you do need to rest as part of building muscle. But, there's also a correlation between the fact that why do people who do decathlon visualize themselves doing all 10 different sports? They tend to do visualization for about an hour a day, as well as their physical practice. So this was to separate out doing the physical practice from just visualizing it. And it showed that they still had growth, not as much, but they still had growth. So
that's nuts. My, we actually, like a surgeon, but a brain surgeon friend of mine, dad was our soccer coach, and he like made us visualize when we were in like third grade. We were visualizing, and we were always like, oh my God, Dr. McGonagall's like crazy. But he was always like, no, you got it. When you guys go home tonight, you need to like visualize. This is a big thing in sports.
Yeah, but the thing is, visualization in sports psychology has been around since at least the 70s.
So how do we apply it to the rest of our lives?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, if it can contribute to muscle growth, and it can contribute to looking, feeling, behaving younger, and it can contribute to actually making you walk more slowly, then what else can it do? That's the real, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? In terms of when you visualize a sporting goal, you are visualizing the actual activity, but you're also visualizing success.
Yeah.
So let's take that out of the sporting arena and think about visualizing success in an interview, giving a speech, in any business goal. It's I guess what it always comes down to for me is it's not going to harm you to visualize success in that area. It's not going to guarantee success, but what we see is that it does improve the possibility of achieving success in a goal that is over and above just completing the actions that you can to try to reach that goal.
Yeah. And conversely, like if you're constantly ruminating on negative things,
that's more likely to come true as well.
Yeah. I have 2 questions for you. So one, before Primal Kitchen, I was like I got hired at this company, Kavita. They also sold, it's a kombucha company. Actually, you might appreciate this, but it's actually like like water kefir. So you would even like it more because whatever, kefir, and kombucha's fermented in black tea. This was fermented in water.
Yeah.
But I was hired there by this friend who works for me now at Primal Kitchen. She's one of my best friends, Amanda. And I remember thinking at the time, I'm like, oh my gosh, it would be so cool if one day I could be a marketing consultant like Amanda. And then I did that.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh my gosh, it would be so cool if one day I could be like a founder of a food company. And then I did that.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking, how great would it be if we could exit? I mean, we sold Primal Kitchen for $200 million. So then that happened. And then I just had this moment where I was like, holy shit, I need to be like careful about what I'm dreaming about because I might actually achieve it. So like if I'm just thinking, how cool would it be to one day be a marketing consultant? Maybe that was probably appropriate for me at the time, right? Mm-hmm. But it just was for me like this interesting moment of like, what is going on here? And I got to be real careful because I keep achieving what one day wouldn't it be cool? So like, I don't know. I know you are kind of like a well-known thought leader on manifestation as well. I'm curious your thoughts on just this exercise and what this means for us and what we should be doing.
I would say I'm a thought leader on how neuroplasticity underlies manifestation, which is kind of different to how a lot of other people speak about manifestation.
Yeah.
And so neuroplasticity is the fact that your brain can change at any age, regardless of your mindset, and even if you feel like you're really stuck. So you weren't particularly feeling like you're really stuck. So you were able to dream big.
Yeah.
But
in my 20s, I was feeling like I was really stuck.
Okay, yeah. So, people will have been there and people, it can go up and down as well. Sometimes you can feel like, be careful what you wish for. Sometimes you can feel stuck again.
Yeah. I don't know what I want. What do I want to do? All that.
Yeah.
What do I want to do with my life? Yeah,
and there is a little bit of I'm just going to throw this one in there, that if you always think you know what you want, then you may not be opening up to possibilities that you haven't thought of yet. So I like to do a bit of both.
Interesting. I like that. Got to create the space.
I always say leave a bit of space for magic. But the point of what you were doing is that neuroplasticity, to action that in real life, is a 4-step process. And the first step is raised awareness. So that is raising from non-conscious to conscious what it is that you want. And what really struck me about what you said is that you were very clear about what you wanted. Most people aren't. Yeah. So, you know, they might say, I don't love my job. You know, I'm not really that happy in my relationship. I'm not really feeling like I'm the most healthy and fit that I could be, but they're not really clear on what they want, you know, to change. So raised awareness is 50% of the battle.
Interesting.
And you were already there. You know, you were thinking in that way that was like, wouldn't this be cool? And, you know, very specific on what it was. So then the stages that come after that are focused attention, which means that you notice opportunities to move yourself towards that goal. Deliberate practice, which means that you take those opportunities. And accountability, which is that, you know, you've either shared that goal with someone or you look back and say, I said I wanted to do that and I did, or I didn't, you know, and you're aware of that. So to notice opportunities, that obviously comes very easily on from knowing what you want.
Yeah.
To grasp opportunities, you've got to have the confidence and level of self-worth to take that step to grasp it.
Yeah.
And I'm, you know, imagining from your story, but also just like from being with you and your energy, that you went out there and you like grabbed opportunities if, you know, if they were around.
Yeah. I'm almost like too opportunistic. If we're going to do like a psychiatry session here, sometimes I have a problem. Like I want to do everything. And sometimes you have to decide, like, just because it's an opportunity doesn't mean you have to do all the opportunities.
True. But I think that the more common scenario is you missed an opportunity, not you, but someone missed an opportunity, or they noticed it, but they were too scared to take it.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
So how do you build the confidence? Like,
so the way that I work with people on that is if there's a failure or a near miss. So if somebody said that they wanted to do something, but they didn't, I always say, that's okay, but if not, why not? So then we get to the thoughts behind why they didn't do something they could have done. And then you have to dig deeper than that and get to the underlying belief that drives that thought. So if the thought was, well, I think there were better people that were going to interview for that role than me, or things like that never work out for me, then you need to dig underneath that and say, what is it that you believe about yourself that makes you say those things? Once the person gets a real light bulb moment about the self-belief, then they can create a positive affirmation that is the opposite of that belief. So, you know, that could be something like, I will be the best candidate for that role, or I'm the kind of person that sort of thing works out for if I actually make the effort to go for it. So then every time you think that's not going to happen for me, you replace it with the positive affirmation. Now that's actually a very ancient, like, Buddhist teaching, but neuroplasticity backs it up, because you can't undo wiring that exists in your brain, but you can overwrite it with a new desired behavior, way of thinking, or belief.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going a little back here, but when you say like 50% of the battle is kind of just knowing what you want to be clear about that. What if you're not clear? Like, I have a big decision in my life to make, right? Like, and just in general right now. And I'm struggling with some of these like big decisions. Like, I feel like I have historically been clear and I'm not. Like, how do you get clear?
Do you want to share the actual example or not? You don't have to.
I can share. I can totally share. So we move all the time. My husband and I, like, we've moved our family to like San Diego. We moved to Florida during COVID. We came back to LA. We're just like, I'm nomadic.
Yeah.
I like went to camp for 8 weeks when I was 8 years old and traveled. I lived in South America for 2 years after college. I've traveled and lived in Australia. I've been to Europe. I like love moving. It's not stressful for me.
Same.
We kind of just like love it. We don't mind. But then part of me, I'm like talking to you thinking like I have an inner voice that's like, you're crazy. Why do you keep moving? You're never happy anywhere. But really I am. Like, I'm actually fine. I'm like, oh, that would be fun to try, or that would be fun to try. And so we're debating like and maybe I'm putting too much pressure on myself, but my oldest is about to enter kindergarten next year. And we like where we are, but we know we don't want to stay there. It's like, it's too far. Like I came to meet you today because it's too far in LA to do things. So you already know. And there's a small community near us with like 3 different towns we could live in. And we like actually have an offer signed in our email on like, we've countered and we've come to a negotiation on this piece of property that we could build like the dream house and it's a place we totally want to live, but there's this community of people we have in the other town. So we're like, do we live where we want to live or do we go where we already have the friends? And we like can't decide. We're just like, people are like, are you guys going to like decide? We're like, I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about it tonight, maybe tomorrow. And it's like been hanging over my head for like years, like 2 years.
Okay.
This where should I live thing. And I move, and then I'm like, maybe I was telling my therapist who's also Buddhist, triathlete. He's like 80. I've been seeing him for 15 years. He married my husband and I. He's amazing, David Roadhouse. But I was telling him the other day, I'm like, David, I just like think something's wrong with me. And he like started dying laughing. He's like, Morgan, you are like too funny. But anyway, so that's what I mean. And I'm just like, how do I get clear? How do I get clear?
So I'm going to give you a few specifics because I think we can always talk generally about this, but I feel like more gold might come out if I actually try to like, dig into this with you. So the first thing I would say, if you were my client, is that don't underestimate how stressful it is having 3 kids under the age of 5.
Yeah.
And, running a full-time like business and podcast and everything else that you do. And what's been looming for you as a former nomad, and you're talking like back to 8 years old after college,
Camp for 8 weeks, 8 years old, study abroad.
So that's your identity. That's been there like for almost as long as you've been conscious.
Yeah.
But with a 5-year-old who's about to go to kindergarten, that's going to change.
Yeah.
And that is scary for you.
Yeah.
That's why you can't decide.
Yeah, because it's like a big commitment.
Yeah,
I want to be somewhere where he is.
Yeah.
Totally why I can't decide. Because I can't just move again in 2 years.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And so the solution in more generic terms, because I've had so many examples like this, is you've just got to make a decision and then make it work.
Yeah.
Because there is no right decision.
Yeah.
That whatever decision you make as a family, you have to make it work. Then it turns out to be the right decision.
Yeah.
If you make it and then you say, oh no, we went to the different town and we're not near any of our friends and now we really regret that, then it was a bad decision.
Then that's my reality.
Well, no, but what you can choose to say, we can still be friends with those people, but we'll also make new friends in our new town, and that will be great. So it's how you frame the consequence of your decision that makes it the right decision or not.
Yeah.
There's
going to be no right. We're going to move in
exactly.
the other place and be like, oh, but we really like the other town more.
Yeah.
So like,
And
I
now
just
we're stuck with our friends. We're never making
No, I mean, I love our friends.
I know.
But yeah, no, that's very good advice. It's back to like the mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that unprompted therapy session that I really needed today. The real estate agent is going to be so happy I interviewed you today. He's going to be like, oh, finally, they'll make a decision. Okay. I did this thing also, and maybe I used to like stress falling asleep at night. You would lay in bed. I feel like, this is a big thing for people, right? Like sleep. I feel like we've put so much pressure on sleep that almost it's like having the opposite effect. I don't know. Like there's so much like if you don't have good sleep, you're tracking your sleep, wearing my Aura ring, the whole thing. It's especially hard with little kids. But even when I was little, like I feel like I had a hard time falling asleep. I don't have a hard time falling asleep anymore. But what I used to do when I was falling asleep and I couldn't fall asleep, I would like think of my perfect day or like imagine my life in the future. And I didn't realize what I was doing was kind of like a manifestation or visualization exercise. But is there any like science behind this stuff?
Oh, absolutely. So as you were saying that, I was thinking, wow, you're a real big natural visualizer and manifester. And so I actually, for people who aren't naturally like that, I advise people to make what was formerly known as a vision board, but I call it an action board because I always say you can't just create a fantasy and daydream about it and not do anything, to make it happen. So I ask people to place this action board next to their bed so that it's the first thing you see in the morning and the last thing you see at night, because the states between being awake and falling asleep and being asleep and waking up are called the hypnagogic and hypnopompic states. And they are states where your subconscious is very impressionable. So there's a psychological phenomenon called the Tetris effect, which is based on the generation of people that played Tetris on a Game Boy when they were in bed as a child. And then when they had to put the Game Boy down and go to sleep, they could still see the bricks falling, in their mind's eye. So that's an example of how the thing that you look at last can create an impression on your brain whilst you're asleep overnight. And so when you prime your brain like that, the next day when you're walking around, you're more likely to notice potential, opportunities to move you closer to that goal. It's like when you buy a new car, suddenly you see exactly that
my
car
God.
everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're shopping for the car and you're like, everyone has one. It's like every third car in the highway, but it's really not. It's just what you
What you
see.
notice, yeah.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. Okay. Talk to me about like your key 3 things for high performers for like happiness.
Sleep.
Sleep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
No pressure.
Ideally 8 hours and 15 minutes of sleep per night. That's in population norms.
Okay, that is so specific. Tell me why 8 hours and 15 minutes.
Well, so in population norms, which is like most people, you know, without outliers at either
Yeah.
end, 8 hours and 15 minutes seems to be ideal.
Okay.
More than that is depressogenic, so it can actually lower your mood. So we don't want to be sleeping too much. But less than 8 hours means that the cleansing process that takes place in your brain overnight doesn't have enough time to finish its job. So that's why it can be so specific.
Okay.
And we know that regular sleep and wake times are really important. So within an hour, going to bed and waking up at the same time, that leads to the best quality and length of sleep that you can get. And, you know, I cannot emphasize how important sleep is for performance, energy, happiness,
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you said happiness, and you know, we'll cover that as like, you know, being happy in your social family situation, and you know, so happy in work, everything. I'm going to say, so to me, the 3 are sleep, time in nature has been proven, particularly since the pandemic, as so crucial to your mental health, your physical health, and your longevity. And you know, it's not just a nice to have. It's depending on where you live, you may or may not be surrounded by nature. So particularly if you're not, it's important to, you know, try to get to a source of water or trees. We know that trees and plants, some more than others, secrete chemicals called phytoncides that boost your immune system.
Really?
So when you walk past these trees, the chemicals that come out of them actually cause an increase in the release of natural killer cells in your immune system, which eat up the minor infections and even cancerous cells that proliferate through our body on a day-to-day basis.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Like, do I need these in my house? Can I put these for
You can have them in your house.
What kind are we talking here?
So I actually don't remember all of them off by heart, but I know that cedars and cypresses and lime trees were on the list. There's more.
Yeah.
So either having a garden, even if you have a terrace, having potted plants and having plants in your house as well helps. But it's much better to get outside into nature if you can. And then the third one, and this is all the latest research. So this is on top of the obvious things like eat healthily and drink enough water.
Right, and exercise and all that.
Yeah. Is having a purpose that transcends yourself. So, you know, you've mentioned having kids and, you know, having a business that you love and a podcast that you love. But all of those things, they still give you some personal gain. So finding something that is more altruistic, but, you know, really like feeds your soul and doesn't necessarily give you a material reward. Those are the top 3 things that really like optimize someone's life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, give me some examples of those things.
So volunteering is one of those things. So in volunteering, you know, that can be anything from, it can actually be anything from like donating money to a charity, but actually giving your time. So maybe helping an elderly neighbor with their groceries, or, you know, doing something in the arts that benefits people maybe that don't get access to it. Yeah, even just like phoning up a friend and checking if they're okay, you know. And
anything you're doing that's not like just for your own personal intrinsic. Yeah. You're like, okay, I'm going to tell you all the ways you're very self-absorbed, Morgan. No, just kidding.
You know, having compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I
it's,
love
you know, of course, mostly we are doing things that are, you know, beneficial to self. But this kind of something that is not directly beneficial to yourself actually benefits you so much that it's kind of like good to do it for that reason too.
Yeah. I love that very much. I saw this, I heard this clip. I don't know if there's any validity to this, but it was some psychiatrist or some scientist or someone said that they asked, like, what do you think is more important, thinking positively or eliminating negative thinking? And they had like some science to back up the fact that eliminating negative thinking was actually almost more important than focusing on thinking positive. we're in America. We're like the land of like,
Positive thinking.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, kind of. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not certainly the land of living that way, but I would feel like we're known as like being optimistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's warranted or not. So what do you think about that? Do you think one's more important than the other?
So having a positive outlook is really important, but it's harder to not focus on negatives. That's a very natural gearing for our brain.
Yeah.
It's a survival mechanism
Right.
from, millennia ago. It's called loss avoidance or loss aversion. And in behavioral economics, the clearest example of that is that when you came here to meet me, if you dropped $20 out of your pocket in the parking lot, even though, it's not a massive amount, you would just you'd say, oh, yeah, why did I do that? It was such a dumb thing to do. And you might even send our friend from Florida back to the parking lot to see if he could find it. But equally,
Poor Ryan. Yeah.
I don't know why this Florida thing's become.
It's really coming up. Yeah.
But if on your way here you actually just saw $20 like lying in the parking lot and you picked it up, you'd have kind of forgotten. You might keep it, you might give it to a homeless person, but you'd forget about that pretty
Right.
quickly. We dwell on the negatives much more.
Oh yeah.
So actually being able to turn those around a bit more would be more powerful in terms of benefits to your brain, but it's definitely harder to do.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. You mentioned art. I know this is like near and dear for you. So talk to us about like the science behind art.
So I'll relate it back to nature, and I want to, it to cover all creativity. So it could be like art, dance, music.
Okay.
Yeah. So you and I might have different taste in art or music, but nature is the palette that humanity has existed in forever. So we all find it pleasing. It lowers our blood pressure. It lowers our heart rate, our breathing rate. And it is a thing of beauty.
Yeah.
So basically, when we perceive something of beauty, it has a beneficial effect on our brain and our nervous system. And so there's two types of art, and that's making and beholding. So you can behold beauty by, seeing nature, going to the theatre, listening to music, reading a novel. But you're making art when you draw, paint, sing, hum, chant, write, dance. And you don't have to be good at it, but doing it is really beneficial. So particularly if you're kind of self-conscious, maybe because you think, oh, I'm not, I don't have rhythm, or I'm not a good, good at sketching or something. Just do it privately. Just, do it by yourself, for yourself. The science of how much it benefits us is incredible. I mean, there's a whole book now called Your Brain on Art, written by two people, Ivy Ross, who's the head of product design at Google. She used to be at Mattel, and Susan Magsamen, who is faculty at the Centre for Neuroaesthetics at Johns Hopkins. So really, smart people, done lots of studies and...
Okay, sorry. Done lots of studies, sorry.
Demonstrating the importance of having various forms of art in our life, whether we're doing it ourselves or just having it around us.
Yeah. I just it makes me depressed to think it's like coming out of school curriculum, like just this stuff going on in schools. I cannot wrestle with this. I'm struggling. I mean, maybe it's the mom thing, but I'm just
yeah.
I mean, it's depressing. What do I do? What do you do? You just got to do
activities, which means it puts all the pressure on, onto the parents. And yeah, I think what depresses me is if people aren't aware of neuroaesthetics, which is now a field, which is like the importance of beauty on your brain.
Yeah.
And, indulging in art and creativity. If that's being taken out of school, then if parents don't know about it or don't have the bandwidth to help their children to do
I mean, I can handle the extracurricular, but think of the millions of people that can't.
I know.
It's so depressing to me.
But, a really great thing for kids is colouring in mandalas. So just, even if you have to draw it out on a piece of paper and just let them colour it in.
Yeah.
And photocopy it 10 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
And just humming, having music on in the background, maybe when you're cooking, and encouraging your children to sing along or hum.
Yeah. My husband puts music on every morning. God bless him. Because I'm he's great. Anyway, I love it. Okay. I am curious your thoughts on death and how you wrestle with death, if you're afraid of it, just you're a spiritual person. So I don't ask this to a lot of people, but I do to spiritual people that I'm curious what they think.
Yeah. Because, as I mentioned earlier, I was brought up in a Hindu culture.
Yeah.
You know, I was brought up with the concept of reincarnation. And definitely throughout my life, that has been of comfort. You know, believing that when somebody physically dies from this material plane, they don't disappear forever, that, you know, that they can potentially be reborn.
Yeah.
It's comforting. And then, of course, you get to a certain age where you actually start losing people and you start to question those beliefs.
Yeah.
So I have delved into this. I had this amazing guy on the podcast. His area of research is terminal lucidity, which is when people with a brain injury or a degeneration of the brain, so Alzheimer's, other types of dementia, stroke, etc., who, you know, lose their memory, their consciousness, don't recognize their own children, don't remember that they had children, suddenly become lucid again towards the end of their life and remember their children's names, speak to them absolutely like in that warm parental way that they always did. Unfortunately, that state usually comes from 1 hour to 1 day before death. But it does show that where we thought that ability was completely lost in the brain, it must be somewhere because it can come back.
Yeah.
And then, so that was Dr. Alexander Bathiani. Dr. Bruce Grayson has done decades of research on near-death experiences. And he wasn't a spiritual person at all. He's a psychiatrist at University of Virginia and actually sort of anecdotally started hearing people saying that they had like floated out of their body and seen him talking to their relatives and things like that. And, you know, 50 years ago, there were hardly any documented cases of this. Now there are thousands, tens of thousands. So, you know, it's being looked at in a more scientific way, which I think is great. Dr. Jim Tucker, also at University of Virginia, another psychiatrist, looks at past life memories in children. And there's something called mind sight, which is where people who've been blind their whole life have a near-death experience and they can see. So all this tells us really is that there are aspects of our consciousness that can exist in the absence of the physical neurons and chemicals and electrical signals being there. And so that can lead us to a strong impression that our consciousness can exist even beyond physical death. That cannot be proven, but the scientists that I know that work in that area and through my own personal experience, it's very exciting to think that we may be moving towards like being more able to say that that is possible. And I think, you know, especially after the pandemic, but obviously throughout life, where people have experienced actual loss through death or breakdown of relationship or loss of connection to self, these ancient wisdoms, you know, these beliefs like reincarnation and past lives, the fact that they're being even looked into by scientists and physicians, I think is really comforting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big step.
Yeah.
It's cool. So you're not like scared of death?
Most humans are. So
Yeah.
that is a condition of human life. I think I'm probably one of the lucky ones that is less scared of it than the average person. You know, what I've learned from my research is that to not think about death as that last, you know, short period of your life, but to think about death in terms of how you want to live your life. Yeah. And that if you have a purpose that transcends yourself, if you are compassionate and kind and merciful as many times as you can be in your life, you're going to have a lot less to regret when you're on your deathbed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it does kind of, the idea of death gives like living purpose, right? I mean, what would we really be doing if we didn't have deaths? It's very interesting. I asked David, my like 80-year-old Buddhist therapist, about this, and he's like, well, what if this is the dream? You know, he's like, no, I don't even think about it. He's like, what if? And I was like, God, I just love that. I need more of that in my life. So interesting. Okay. So what would you say? We didn't talk much about meditation. Mm-hmm. Are you a big meditator?
Oh, interestingly, not anymore. So I have been a big meditator.
I'm so glad I asked you this now then. Okay.
Well, although it's for a reason. Okay. So I, you know, I've had a yoga and meditation practice for over 20 years.
Okay.
What happened for me in the pandemic is this happened naturally, and then I found out the research that backs it up. It's amazing. Is that when you meditate, let's say you do 10 minutes, 20 minutes, even an hour, then for 1 hour of your day, you're being mindful. And for 23 hours of your day, you're living your regular life. Mm-hmm. Once you merge those things, you don't need to sit in meditation. When you live 24 hours a day trying to be mindful, so you do mindful walking, mindful chopping up of your vegetables, mindful cooking. Like I said, my parents ingrained in me from a child, you have to give gratitude before you take your first bite of food. That immediately slows down how quickly you eat.
Yeah.
And means that at least 2 or 3 times a day, you're expressing gratitude.
Yeah.
And attention is a really important one. So with kids particularly, it's very easy to find that your kids are talking to you and you're half listening, but you're also scrolling on your phone or you're thinking about work. If you can give mindful attention to your kids, and with kids, all you have to do is the number of minutes per day for their age. So with your 5-year-old, you only have to put your phone down for 5 minutes and absolutely focus on your child and what they're saying to you. That's enough for their mental health. And it also means that you're paying mindful attention for that period of time. The more you can bring in things like that, I sort of think of it as a patchwork quilt. Like, where are the little patches that you're bringing mindfulness
throughout
into
the
your
whole
life?
day? Yeah. I'm like on this Aura Ring thing, but they just launched like a new feature where they track your heart rate variability during the day. They used to only like give a report once in the morning, and it like, who knows if, it can be an indicator of stress, right? Like you can see your heart rate variability goes down, you might be more stressed, but it's interesting to see. I had that realization. I'm like, gosh, if I just I wake up in the morning and I'm not stressed, if I meditated in the morning and then I just go about my stressful day, what did I really do for myself, right?
And also, how many things can you do first thing in the morning? It's also meditate first thing in the morning.
Drink your lemon water, do your intermittent fasting, work out, in a fasted state, do your journal. I mean, forget it. No, I wake up and I'm lucky if I can even make it to an 8:00 meeting on time with the kids and, But so that is interesting. When you say bring mindfulness into just everyday activities, give me an example, chopping your vegetables. What would that look like to be truly mindful chopping your vegetables?
So like I said, in the pandemic, when there was no boundary between work and home, I used the vegetable chopping as my time to say, okay, I've finished work now and I'm moving into house mode. So, I'll be honest, sometimes I listen to a podcast at that time. But that's not, multitasking is not mindful.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So it's just really being present in the one thing you're doing.
Yeah. And, if you go for a nature walk, equally, a lot of people say, oh, I listen to podcasts when I do that. But if I'm doing a nature walk, I'm literally
in nature.
Yeah. And looking at flowers and petals and mushrooms and leaves and listening to birdsong. And, I do think paying attention to the people you love is a really important one.
Yeah.
And then, mindful cooking as well, just the stirring, the smell.
Totally.
When I chop my vegetables, I think about the size of the piece of food that someone's going to have to put into their mouth. So, it's all very, and the different colours of the things that I'm choosing. And then with the eating, obviously giving the gratitude before, eating slowly, really chewing it quite a few times, not having a television on or your phone next to you. Yeah, just kind of being present with each activity. Yeah,
all day.
Well,
in bursts.
At
least
not
in bursts throughout the day.
Yeah, as much as you can. For certain things. Yeah, it's not. I'm definitely not advocating that anyone tries to or pretending that I am doing that 24/7. But I'm trying to bring it into my day as much as possible.
And have you noticed a positive shift for you versus when you were doing your practice before?
Definitely. So during the pandemic, I lived like that a lot more. Yeah. I have to admit that since the pandemic and, being back to working.
Traveling.
Yeah. It's not the same. But, at least I got a taste of that. And I know that that's what life can be like. And maybe I can bring that more into my weekends or the holidays. So funnily enough, I then stumbled across the research, which actually said that is a higher evolution of mindfulness. It's, when you're separating mindfulness from your regular life, that's quite a low level of being mindful. But when you're integrating it into your life, that's the next evolution. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I could talk to you forever. Okay, I'm going to ask you my last question. I ask everyone this, but what's something most people don't know about you?
Oh my goodness.
Do you know Tim Spector from Zoe?
I love him.
Yeah. When you said 30 vegetables a day, he was on the podcast 2 years ago with me. And he like told me he got in some like plane crash. And I was like, God, what?
wow.
Like he had
Okay.
some helicopter or plane crash. I was like, this is crazy. People tell me crazy things.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. Like
I'm
what's
quite
something?
transparent. I don't know if I can think of a crazy
Well,
thing.
just like it's not even crazy, but just something most people don't know, like something from your childhood or your favorite something. I don't know. Could be anything.
I wanted to be an actress.
Okay, that's out
Yeah.
there. Like we wouldn't have guessed that.
I really wanted to be an actress, and I was, my English teacher said, "You're so talented. You should read English at Oxford. You should go to RADA." I came home, I told my parents, and my father said, "Over my dead body."
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the podcast and the TV show, the frustrated actress.
You kind of got it, but you got it out in a...
I'm still working on it.
Yeah. In a meaningful way. Well, I love that. It seems like you don't have a lot to work on, but it was so glorious to meet you. Okay, tell everyone where they can find you and about your podcast. We didn't get to talk a lot about it. And you have a new book that came out recently.
No.
Okay. But your original book. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're not having another book because you're doing your podcast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing that people don't know.
Like, no, stop asking me to write another book.
I know. I've actually written 3 books. So I co-wrote An Attitude for Acting, and I co-wrote Neuroscience for Leadership. But the source, The Secrets of the Universal Science of the Brain, is my latest book that I wrote by myself, which is the one that merges science and spirituality. I'm most active on Instagram at Dr. Tara Swart, so DrTaraswart. And my podcast is called Reinvent Yourself with Dr. Tara, and season 2 is about applying ancient wisdom to modern life.
I love it. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you.